Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Buff Naggle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Buff Naggle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I am Rafe, and it's a great Tuesday to be doing a podcast with you because, well, first of all, because we always do podcasts on Tuesday, and second of all, because we have a wonderful guest here today. But before that, we also have great listeners, and those listeners have made us a global top 10% podcast. As usual, you and they and anyone else in between can reach us at buffnaggle@buffnaggle.com. Remember to share the love, share the buff, give us 5-star reviews, hit subscribe, hit like, tell your friends to hit like, tell your hens to hit subscribe, your hens to fit subscribe. Do the thing with the button so that you get automatic Buff Naggly content delivered to you as you deserve. Tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. And somewhere buried in the show notes is a link to buy me a coffee. Today is a great Tuesday because it is a podcast with none other than America's favorite rocket scientist and big brain smart head, Bob Luzenski. Bob, we haven't talked in a while. How have you been?
I'm good, Rafe. There is one thing I want to say after that particular introduction, and that is I wish the listeners could understand how hard it is for me to not say anything while Rafe is doing that stream of consciousness introduction.
Well, I have a little. Do you see this? These are notes. These are the notes.
No, I know.
These are the notes.
You say basically the same thing every time.
I have to, and
except not quite.
Well, I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and sometimes people spend like 4 minutes on those preambles that are very necessary.
Yeah.
But we want to get to the content. And
Yes.
so I give that the minimum. It is what do they call it? A possible career risk doing things like that. But I believe in the listeners, and they will come through for us as they should. And
I believe in the listeners as well.
So we have a couple things. Okay, we are recording in late January.
Yes.
And there's a couple things that are happening in the world of rockets, which is a big thing that we talk about when we have America's favorite rocket scientist on the show.
That's me.
Yes. So, and you remind, so there's two pieces of content, and hopefully they are completely disparate pieces of content.
Hopefully they stay that way.
Okay. And I'm going to tell you, I'll lay out what those two are. Then we'll do the first one, and then we'll do the second one. The first one is necessary, but we don't want to spend all our time on it because we just don't want to spend all our time on it. And the first one is what you pointed out to me is about this time every year, NASA has a thing that they call the Week of Remembrances or something of that nature.
It's either a week or Day of Remembrance. I'm actually not clear on that. I thought it was a week, but I could be wrong.
So but there have been some tragic happenings over you launch a lot of rockets for 50, 60, 70 years, however long it's been. And occasionally bad things happen. And there are 3 mishaps, they're calamities, I guess, that have happened that are well noted. And they all are right around this time frame. And that's, I think, why this remembrance takes place now.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And let me lay these 3 out. And then I want to get we need your unfiltered, unfettered opinion. Apollo 1. In January of 1967, we lost 3 astronauts on the pad during testing. In January of 86, the Challenger shuttle exploded during liftoff, I guess, or right out
during ascent.
Ascent, yes. Yep. And we lost 7 of our astronauts. And in February of 2003, we lost 7 members of Columbia during re-entry. And that is, by my count, at least 17 too many. And, you can argue that everybody knows there's risks, but that doesn't take away the sting of those events.
That's true. And I vividly remember all three of those events. I was, as longtime listeners of the podcast will know, I was actually an eyewitness to the Challenger accident, having started working at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on the space shuttle 3 months before the accident. If you haven't listened to that episode and you're interested in hearing more about that, I believe it's episode 19. It's one of the early ones.
It's one of the
You'll
early
find
episodes.
it.
Yeah, we'll find it. Yep.
It's the second one that I appeared on. Anyways, yeah, through some, it's an odd coincidence, probably, that all three of these fatal accidents happened within days of each other on the calendar, and roughly 20 years apart. Going back 59 years ago, January 27th was the Apollo 1 fire. I was a young boy at the time, but I remember we were watching television, and the comedy show we were watching was interrupted with news that the fire had happened and the astronauts were dead. And as I mentioned already, I was working at the Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39 on the shuttle when the Challenger accident happened. So I saw that with my own eyes. And then roughly 20 years later, the Columbia accident, and on coming back, which was actually caused by insulating foam coming off of the external tank during launch. So the damage was done during launch, but the loss of the vehicle and the crew was on reentry. And all three of them, various causes. The two shuttle failures, to a great extent, and people smarter than me have written about the normalization of deviation as a primary reason for both of those accidents. There were reasons for the fire that were there's a lot written on Apollo 1. It's if you're interested, it's worth looking into that as well. But it's important, I think. Yes, there are risks, but there are things you can do to mitigate risks. We'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about the upcoming Artemis II mission, which we want to spend most of our time on. But we thought it was important to recognize this time, and as NASA is doing, to take a step back and think about the reasons for these things happening, and with the goal of not having it happen again.
Yeah, it was interesting because you had mentioned that to me in a text message last week sometime, and I guess I had known that one of these was coming up, but I hadn't realized all three of them were so closely located in time. They are within January 27th through February 1st. That's 4 or 5 days apart on the calendar, and this is as good a time as any to remember these things. These are it is difficult to look back on that and see some of the one that strikes me as so odd is the fire, because I had just turned 2, so I have to say I was not watching a comedy show when it got interrupted with the news bulletin. And looking back, I had seen as a young elementary school kid really appreciating the Apollo flights, that it all looked like everything was, like it was like a season sweep. I mean, everything was a win. Even Apollo 13 was a successful failure, or whatever they call it. Yes. And it just seemed to me perfect until I dove into the history a little bit, and I saw this, and I saw the footage of this, and and heard the stories, and it became very clear to me at that time that it was not as things were not as easy to do as they appeared to do. And when you look back on some of these things, you're like, how could they have done the things that they did at the time that they did them? But it's hindsight is real easy, and that's one of those things that it's easy to practice a little bit of hubris there, and think that you have it all, that you never would have made that mistake. And these are real people trying to do a really good job, and occasionally when you do really hard things, sometimes things slip through the cracks, and it doesn't go your way.
The later success of Apollo through the moon landings was in large part due to the time that they had after the Apollo 1 fire to catch their breath and get it right, and before then starting to fly again, with Apollo 7 in fall of 1968, followed by the run-up to the Apollo 11 landing in July of 1969.
Yeah. So, sometimes it takes, like, we were doing show notes right before we did prep here. And I said Bob says, I want to ask you something. And I said, wait. I need to get these notes down. And he said, take your time and get it right. And for those of you who work in places where it's very cold now here in Indiana as we are recording. And I think it's cold there in Michigan too, Bob, probably colder.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Yep. And it's, I think of the people doing air travel ground jobs, I guess I'll call them, the maintenance, the package loading, getting the people in and out, the pilots for sure, but those guys spraying on the wing deicers and all of those little things that you have to do now when your hands hurt so bad you can't feel them, and you just want to get back inside. That is a temptation. I mean, I did that just the other day, shoveling snow, getting the mail, and I think of those things now. It's easy to cut corners. You just don't want to do it when there's when there are lives on the line, and it's easy to see. It's easy to make mistakes. And sometimes you can never see them coming. So we ought to. There are families that are missing people because of those catastrophes, and there are people that are living with woulda, coulda, shoulda thoughts, and those are hard things. So that's hence the remembrance, and hence
Yes.
the little somber start. And we our hat always goes off to the people who try the hard things, and we appreciate them trying. And sometimes, hopefully, it works well, but hopefully, you're doing everything you can to get it right. So that's the remembrance piece.
Yes, and speaking of hoping they get it right, is our next topic, which is the Artemis II flight, which is coming up as this episode is going to drop potentially by the end of the week. Friday the 6th is the first opportunity for the Artemis II to launch.
Okay,
And
so
go ahead.
Yeah, so Artemis II. Okay, so let's recap this for those of us who aren't worrying about other things like whether or not there will be hot cocoa when we come in from shoveling snow. Artemis II is NASA's first attempt to go back to put people back near. I'm going to say near the moon, because people are going to be going to the moon on this mission. They will not be getting off and taking photos on the ground, but they'll be going there for the first time since 76 or something like that.
This is the first crewed mission of the Artemis program, which is intending to land humans back on the moon, land Americans back on the moon, since the Apollo missions back in late 1960s and early 70s. The last time humans went to the moon was in December of 1972 on the Apollo 17 mission, which was the last Apollo lunar landing. And Since that time, humans have not traveled that far. They've stayed at most, they've stayed in Earth orbit. And this will be the first time since then that we're going to attempt to send a crew out to fly around the moon, not actually enter orbit around the moon, but fly around the moon and then come back as a test for the spacecraft, the Orion spacecraft, and some of the parts of the mission that they're planning on doing when they actually have the lunar lander ready to go.
So things have changed since 1972 as far as technology goes, and what we have available to us, what we've learned and not learned since then is, I know you have some trepidation about this. Let me just raise that.
Let's do this first.
Let's go through what's.
Let's talk about what we're actually doing now, and we can do some comparisons with Apollo, and in that way get into the topic you were
right
wanting to go into. So we have what we had back in the Apollo days. We had Saturn V, we had the Apollo spacecraft. There were actually two spacecraft. There was the command and service module, which is what the crew launched in and returned to Earth in. And they also carried with them a lunar module in which two of the three crew got into the lunar module after they arrived in orbit around the moon, and then rode the lunar module down to the surface of the moon, spent up to 3 days on the moon, exploring, collecting geologic samples, doing scientific experiments, and then getting back in the lunar module, taking the upper half of the lunar module back up to the command module, which is their ride home, and then the three of them returned back to Earth in the command module. So that is the architecture, if you will, of the Apollo missions.
Mm-hmm.
The Artemis has a different architecture, and it's a combination of things for a combination of reasons. The rocket, the SLS Space Launch System, was highly derivative from the space shuttle. That was intentional in order to maintain jobs when the Artemis, when the Space Launch System was first authorized by Congress, so the United States Congress. So we have this rocket. It's not quite as capable as the Saturn V was. It can't lift both a crew spacecraft and a lunar landing spacecraft at the same time. So what that involves then is, for the lunar landing missions, the Orion spacecraft, which is what will be flying on Artemis II, will launch on the Space Launch System, fly to the moon, and meet a lunar lander, which is intended to be already positioned in lunar orbit. And then two of the four Artemis crew will get into the lunar lander, go down to the lunar surface, do whatever they're going to do on the moon, and then fly back up to the Orion spacecraft, and then return from lunar orbit back to the Earth. That's the lunar landing architecture for Artemis.
So the big difference then is that the rocket that's carrying the people is not the rocket that carries the lander.
Yes,
in the new Artemis. Am I hearing that right?
One of the significant things that means is that on the outbound flight from the Earth to the moon, the Artemis crews will not have another spacecraft that they could potentially use as a lifeboat if needed. And those of us who remember or have seen the Apollo 13 in movie form, or who remember Apollo 13 because we were watching it on television as it happened, know that the Apollo service module failed on the explosively on the outbound leg, and it was only because they had the lunar lander with them that they were able to get back home.
Right. So, and no, so that's part of the. Now let's talk about how you actually do this thing, and then I want to get to the question of like where are the risks? What are the tests being done to identify whether they exist or not beforehand? But there's a place in the flight where you make a decision that we're going, and you hit that button, and if you're going and something fails, it's 8 days or so before you can right.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about how
trip.
Let's talk about that trip and what happens. You hit the button and you launch, and what happens?
Okay, so for Artemis II is a little different than the plans for Artemis III. Artemis II, to give some background, a little bit of background in this, I'm going to quickly just recap history on the Apollo flights leading up to the lunar landing on Apollo 11. Apollo, the first crewed flight of Apollo 7, that was a complete. That never left Earth orbit. That was the Apollo Command and Service modules, and it orbited Earth for 14 days, which was at time that was the longest expected Apollo lunar mission, was 14 days.
Okay.
So it was basically a shakedown flight of the Command and Service module, so that they could make sure that worked.
So the thing is, like, can we stay alive in this box for 14 days without coming back?
Does it work in space?
Right. Okay.
There were uncrewed flights prior to that, but this was the first flight with crew and making sure everything worked well, and it did. It worked great. The worst thing that happened on Apollo 7 was the crew got colds, and they were pretty cranky. And
now you said colds, not cold, right?
They had colds, like head colds.
Yeah, yes,
which wasn't fun at all.
Yes, okay.
Anyways, so there was that. The next planned flight in the Apollo series was to do a flight on the Saturn V with the lunar module in Earth orbit. However, the lunar module development was lagging behind where it needed to be. So they were in this position where they had a Saturn V, they had a command and service module, they had a crew, and instead of just waiting for the lunar module to be ready, they decided they needed to take a flight to the moon. And
so that's similar to what they're thinking now. It's like that's one without a lifeboat, right?
Yes,
it's going there.
It was a bold decision at the time, but it moved the ball forward. To use a sports analogy,
Mm-hmm.
It moved the ball forward in terms of risk they needed to retire. It was a daring move that was not without risk, as later we realized on Apollo 13 when that risk was actually realized. But not only did Apollo 8 fly around the moon, Apollo 8 entered lunar orbit. And that way they were able to check out not just flying, being able to communicate and have the crew go out to that distance, but also to have the crew in lunar orbit and to practice that, to retire that risk as well, which they did.
So what's the risk of going into lunar orbit? Is the ability to come out?
Is the ability to leave lunar orbit. Yeah. That the engine that you use to enter lunar orbit needs to work again for you to leave lunar orbit. And so that was a risk that was there on every Apollo flight that entered orbit around the moon. And so they did that. It was spectacular. December of 1968. It for anybody who was alive and old enough to remember, like myself, it was electric. They orbited the moon on Christmas Eve. and left lunar orbit early Christmas morning, and Jim Lovell's famous line when they came around after firing the engine to come on home, please be advised there is a Santa Claus.
Yes. Now, they did a number of trips. How many laps around the moon did
they did 8 2-hour
8. Okay.
orbits around the 10 2-hour orbits for a total of 20 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So that was Apollo 8. So then Apollo 9 came around early in 1969. I can't remember whether it was February or March or April. I'm a little rusty on that. But that was the Saturn V in with the lunar module, first shakedown cruise of the lunar module. And so they tested that. It worked great. And then what followed that was a practice Apollo 10, which then took the whole show out to the moon and did everything for a lunar landing except the last 12 minutes of descent to the lunar surface. So they practiced everything else in order to get ready.
So that's the plan.
That was what happened in Apollo, and then what followed was Apollo 11 that did that last 12 minutes. Right. Now, Artemis, on the other hand, is fast tracking this. Artemis II is doing a flight around the moon, is not entering lunar orbit. They did enter lunar orbit on Artemis I 3 years ago, but that was uncrewed. So they did at least do that. Artemis II is just flying around the moon, but this is also the first flight with. Not only is it the first flight with crew, it's the first flight of the Orion spacecraft where the life support system is actually on board. Artemis I flew without a crew and also flew without a life support system. So whatever air was in the Orion spacecraft when they launched is what they had, and there was nothing to keep humans alive for the length of that. I believe it was 10 or 12, maybe 14-day mission. I don't remember.
Now these missions that they're taking with the Artemis one, they're doing a very long, I guess maybe a broad trip around the moon, right? They're not skirting it very close, right? Am I remembering that right?
Their altitude when they pass the moon will be several thousand miles instead of the 60 miles that the Apollo crews flew in orbit around the moon. And then, so Artemis II is doing this. They're just doing a loop around the moon. It does get them some things. It gets them the experience with the spacecraft, with humans on board, testing the life support system, also testing the heat shield at the higher speed than the Artemis I. And we'll talk about the heat shield in a minute here. But then that is going to lead up to, after the Artemis II, if everything goes well with Artemis II, then the next flight of Artemis III, is intended to be a lunar landing flight. So it's quite compressed. The flight sequence compared to Apollo, the flight sequence of Artemis is quite compressed, and it's very success oriented. And so there's concerns there.
Right. So, okay, you're going to talk about heat shield and high speed, and I keep thinking about this. So if I try to make a very close pass to the moon and zip around, and then I guess what do you go close, and then do you pull out, or do you actually fall back and do you swing around enough to come back out? Do they have to do any? I guess probably like a Earth injection or whatever that is called?
No. The flight plan for Artemis II, once they leave for the moon, that engine burn will take them around the moon, and with the exception of small course corrections that they have planned and potentially will do along the way, with the exception of that, the flight path is basically will bring them back to Earth.
And so then the only fuel they need is to, when they spin it around, to slow down, or do they even bother slowing down, or are they just going to hit it at full speed, hit the atmosphere?
They will hit it at the speed that they're going from falling from the moon's distance. So
that's pretty fast.
Yes, it is. It's on the order of 25,000 miles an hour. So and it will be faster than they're going higher than Apollo, which means they have farther to fall. So it'll be faster than Apollo.
Okay, so the Artemis I, you said that one. Did that one have the same speed that the new one's going to? That the Artemis II is going to?
It was slightly lower.
Okay, but it's in the same neighborhood, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about some of the risks and some of the mitigations for the risks, because I think it's important to talk about those. First being the life support system and a new spacecraft going to the moon. And so, which is a long trip that you can't just say, 2 days in, oh, this isn't going very well, we need to go back home. Once you commit to going to the moon on the Artemis II flight, you're going for the whole 8 days for that part of the trip.
Right.
So what they've planned, the flight plan involves the initial first day is going to be in Earth orbit, but it's going to be in a extended high Earth orbit. And even that, though, they have decision points from starting from launch. Obviously, there's a decision point to launch, but then once you're up and you've done the ascent, then the path they're on initially will take them back to a reentry if nothing else happens.
Okay.
So, and then they have an engine burn that raises their high point of orbit around Earth, and then they have another burn that they'll raise their low point, and what they end up in is and these all happen within the same first orbit. So it's not like they go around and then.
So how long's an orbit at that point? It's just an hour, a couple hours?
The orbit is going to end up being 23 hours. So wow. Basically, it will take them once around, and at each of these decision points before they do the burns, if everything's going well, they'll do the burn, extend the orbit higher, and then at some point during that 23-hour orbit, day-long orbit, they'll be testing things. They'll be making sure everything's working right. So, and then the NASA mission management team will assemble and make the decision whether or not to commit to the 8-day flight to the moon and back.
Okay, so life support in a spacecraft for 8 days requires, well, the first thing I think about is air, right?
But you need oxygen,
right? Okay.
Well, nitrogen, oxygen, yes.
So they make that on the way? They carry it with them?
Apollo made oxygen. Let me make sure I get this right. Nope, never mind. Let me set that aside. Apollo carried oxygen with them, and Artemis, the Orion spacecraft, will do the same. If I'm not mistaken, Orion is oxygen and nitrogen, not just pure oxygen like the Apollo. But humans produce carbon dioxide. Humans produce moisture, humidity, things that it needs to be taken out of the air. So you need a life support system that can do that. This is not new technology, but this system in the Orion spacecraft, this is its first flight. So they have these careful steps and decision points during the flight so that, if things aren't going well, they can go back right away, or they can do the 23 hours and then come back, or they can then decide to do the 8 days after that and go all the way out to the moon and back.
So they're planning one big 23-hour gigantic orbit. It's way out there, right? And
Yes.
then if things are going well, if they check all the boxes they're supposed to check, somebody or some group of people will make a call.
NASA mission management team.
They will make a call, and they will say go, and somebody will hit the button, or the group they'll turn the computer on to do the button, and it will fire for a certain period of time that will send it hurtling toward the moon.
Yes.
And how, do you know how long? Is that a long burn? Is that like 10 minutes? Is that 4 hours? Is that,
I don't remember seeing that detail. Lunar injection. Nope. It doesn't have an exact time. But on Apollo, my recollection was it was about 5 minutes.
Oh, really?
But since they are already going to be in this higher orbit, they will need less energy to
climb out,
to climb that hill. So there's that.
So then they run that thing. Hopefully it's steering in the right direction. And then after a while, at some period of time, the engines stop and they coast up around the moon and then coast back down.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's where we can talk about the heat shield.
Right.
Because at that point, then coming back, at some point as they approach Earth, the service module will be separated from the Orion spacecraft, and then the Orion spacecraft will turn around and put its heat shield forward and prepare to interact with the upper atmosphere, where friction will generate heat because of the speed they're going at, and the heat shield is designed to protect them from that. And what we have to say about that is that there were some unexpected things that happened on Artemis 1 to the Artemis 1's heat shield. And there was quite a bit of analysis done by NASA because the heat shield did not behave in the way their models had expected it to. And so rightly, they investigated it.
Good. Yep.
They spent a good long time doing that. They got to the point where they believe they understand what the mechanism was and why it happened. And they have done some change. There's two paths forward. There's the path forward for Artemis II, and then there's the path forward for Artemis III. For Artemis II, what they've done is they already had a heat shield built that was built the same way as Artemis I. And so in order to use that heat shield without having to incur even longer delays in this mission than they already had, what they decided to do was to modify the path during reentry so that they believe that this will prevent the problems that were happening with the heat shield. And to be fair, the Artemis I survived reentry and landed intact and was fine. The Artemis II, they did the analysis because the behavior didn't match the models, and they needed to improve their models. And then with that understanding, they then modified the plan for how Artemis II performs its reentry in order to mitigate the problems that they found with Artemis I.
So you say they're going to change they're modifying the reentry path, I think is the term you used.
Yes.
So you still have to come down. Is it an angle of attack thing, or
it was more with Artemis I, they did a dip into the atmosphere and then they kind of popped out, and then they came back in for the second round. And so they kind of skip. It's like skipping a stone. It's like skipping a stone on the water.
All right.
And so they kind of skipped up and then back down, and their understanding from studying it was that when they did the skip part is when the problems happened. And so for Artemis II, they're not going to do quite nearly the skip that they did on Artemis I. And the intention is for that to mitigate the risk for Artemis II. Artemis III, they have redesigned the heat shield. So for the Artemis III mission, they will have a redesigned heat shield that will that does not use the same materials and will be better able to cope with the speeds of reentry from the moon.
Okay, so what's okay? Because I think of a couple things for heat shield. We've seen these pictures of a. Okay, does the space? I guess it's what piece are the people in when they're coming into the atmosphere? They're in. Is that the command module?
The little cone, yes.
The little cone. Okay.
The Orion spacecraft is the cone-shaped quote command module,
and
similar
it looks
to the Apollo days,
okay,
which was called the command module.
Right. So and it's got that kind of rounded heat shield on the bottom.
It's got a bottom, and the heat shield has material that.
Okay, right, and that's what I want to get to. Okay, so this thing gets real hot. Okay.
Yes, it does, and it ablates, which is a fancy word for chars and burns off, but doesn't. The problem that happened with Artemis I was parts of the heat shield were getting bubbles in the middle of it, and parts were popping off, which is a bad thing. It could lead to a very bad day.
Okay, so this is made of so this thing that they are in, how big is this? I mean, would it fit in my living room? Is it as big as a Suburban? What's its general size?
It's I don't know the exact diameter of the Orion spacecraft. I do. The Apollo command module was about 12 feet in diameter.
Right. Okay.
And
it's going to be in the same neighborhood as that, right? I mean,
I think it's a little bigger. Okay. I actually scrolled over those kind of details.
But here's what I have to have a picture. Okay, so this thing.
Yeah. So it's
okay, and it's got a rounded like a saucer on the bottom. Okay.
Yeah.
And it has and then there's this magic space age, of course, material on the bottom of this thing, heat shield material. Okay, and what are the principles of this stuff? Okay, does it
as I said, it's meant to ablate.
It slowly, when it gets real hot, eventually falls apart. Is that the idea?
It slowly chars at the surface to dissipate the heat.
Okay. So does it actually burn up? Does it? I mean, it's oxidizing.
The word is ablate. That's
ABLAT. Ablate.
Yes.
ABLAT. All right. And how thick is a heat shield? Is it like a foot thick? Like 4 inches?
You're going off in the weeds. You're going off in the weeds when we need to be wrapping up.
All right. Okay. All right.
It's. Okay. I don't have all those details prepared.
That is okay. I can ask the questions, and you are free to say, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, that's great. We don't know.
Those kind of details, we can leave those
as an exercise to the reader.
As an exercise for the student.
Yes. Okay. That is great. Okay. So let me see if I can summarize this. Sometime after this episode drops, which will be on this early February sometime.
Let's be a little more specific. The first launch period is February 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th, and 11th.
Okay.
The next one is in March, early March, and the one after that is in April. So they have an opportunity once a month for several days to fly this mission. And that has to do with where the position of the moon is relative to the launch site and so on and so on.
Okay. All right. So it will launch, and hopefully, in a perfect world, 4 people go up, 4 people come back alive. That's the
best case.
All right. And the worst case of those best cases is that sometime right after launch, they have to bail out and we never get figured out. Right. But the best thing is they launch, they do that 1 day getting bigger and bigger orbit thing where they test all their stuff. There's a thumbs up.
Go for translunar injection.
They shoot around the moon. They come flying back in. The heat shield gets hot and ablates properly.
Yes.
And that word becomes very common in everybody's lexicon. And they splash down.
Yes. Three big parachutes splash down, I believe in the Pacific Ocean.
So
I don't even know that.
Are these the standard
Shame
red and
on
white
me.
parachutes, or are these is Hardee's sponsoring the NASA parachutes these days?
They have standard red and white looking
All right.
parachutes.
Okay, that is a wonderful thing, Bob. We could
talk about this for hours.
I'm going to shut down the recording here, and we'll probably talk for the next hour and a half.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you. It is how do I say this? Every time it is one of the great joys of my life is to do the podcast with you. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
And I feel absolutely the same way about this as you do, Rafe.
Wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Like I said, it is my pleasure. And the rest of you out there, you know the deal. Remember to seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life.
It's going to be a great day.